Okay, good afternoon. Bonjour, Tansi. I'm with the Faculty of Social Work. I'm here to talk to you about an idea I'm very excited about, and I think, as the host mentioned, something we've talked about in Canada for a long time, but it's really been coming to the forefront very recently. It's called basic income. The place to start is with the definition. It's an income unconditionally granted to each individual without a means test or other conditions. And it actually differs in very substantial ways, very important ways, from existing income security programs. It's paid to individuals rather than households. It's paid irrespective of any income from other sources. So people will, in the vast majority of cases, continue to work for wages and salaries, will start small businesses, will farm, but it provides a floor for everyone, a very, very important form of economic security. And it's paid without regard to performance of any paid work. It differs very greatly from the kind of workfare and punitive income security programs which have come into place in recent years. There's two delivery mechanisms for basic income, two general ways in which it can be paid out and gotten into the hands of the people, of all the people in society. The first one's called a demo grant. This is where a certain amount of money is paid on a regular basis to everybody in society. It could be a check in the mail. It could be a deposit in your bank account or credit union account. It can be, if it's designed in this way, taxed back from high income earners who perhaps need it less, but it does go to everyone in society. The second general way to deliver it is called negative income tax, also called a refundable tax credit. And in this case, a threshold of adequacy is set, an income that everybody needs in order to live a comfortable and dignified life. If you fall below that threshold, then your benefit kicks in, and the further you're below the threshold, the more benefit you get to bring you up to the threshold. So in that sense, it's targeted to those most in need, and it's also perhaps a better way to, a cheaper way in which to deliver it. We actually have examples of both these mechanisms still in place in relation to current benefits for children. Those of you who are old enough to remember the old family benefits baby bonus, 1995 and previous, it was a demo grant. The current child tax benefit is delivered as a refundable tax credit or a negative income tax. What I'm going to do for the rest of my talk is really give you an overview of what I think are the 5 key reasons we need to implement an effective basic income program in this country, and I'll go through each one individually. First of all, it's really important in Canada that we address and reduce, and one would hope eventually eliminate, poverty. This is an important reason on 2 counts. First of all, in a wealthy country like Canada, with bountiful resources and one of the highest qualities of life in the world, it's a moral obscenity that we have the high rates of poverty that we have. So there's a moral imperative. The second reason we need to reduce poverty in this country is because it's the smart thing to do. And I'll talk briefly about both. First of all, on the moral side, the why we need to address poverty, these are some quick statistics. 1 in 7, 4.9 million Canadians live in a state of poverty, so it's a general problem. It's particularly, it hits certain vulnerable groups, particularly hard. Racialized families, single mothers. The 2 shocking statistics for me here are 50% of Status First Nations children live in poverty. Almost 60% of women with disabilities. So it's a general problem, and it hits particular groups in very hard ways. The second reason we need to reduce poverty, and basic income is a means to do this, I would argue, is that poverty costs us. There's the combined public and private costs of alleviating poverty or addressing the problems that result from poverty we get into staggering figures in the $70 and $80 billion range. Remedial costs, this means there's a tremendous relationship between living in poverty and bad health outcomes, disease, hospitalization, heavy reliance on the healthcare system. So if we can reduce poverty, it makes sense that we can also reduce costs in the healthcare system. There's other negative effects of poverty that cost us, including children that don't do well in school and need more help, child welfare costs, costs in the criminal justice system. All of these problems are related with high rates of poverty. The second point here relates to, with poverty, there are costs related to loss of revenues. When you're living in poverty, you have many barriers that you have to surmount in order to join the labor market and have a good job. And it's, for instance, if you talk to people who live in poverty and have to navigate the labyrinth, the maze of benefits and conditions and eligibility criteria, people in poverty often say it's a full-time job trying to be a poor person and trying to get enough money to live. And even if you get some benefits, you're still below any degree of adequacy. So if we had a basic income to eliminate that bureaucracy, that maze, people that are currently living in poverty might actually have the opportunity to get job training, to reorganize their lives, to get a job, and become tax-paying citizens in the labor force. I'd like to move on to the second reason that we need to implement an effective basic income program in Canada, and that relates to equality. There's a relationship between equality and poverty, but there are also distinct reasons and give us different reasons to think about implementing basic income. This chart here, just to orient you for a minute, this comes from the work of Wilkinson and Pickett and the Equality Trust in Britain, which has done great work over the years on talking about the effects of inequality in society. Now, just to explain this chart, the axis on the bottom, going from left to right, tracks increasing levels of income inequality in various societies. Those dots are specific countries. The axis going up and down relates to health and social problems that are related to measures of different health and social problems, such as infant mortality, low life expectancy, health problems, high rates of imprisonment, etc. So you'll see on the scattergram here that it's good to live in a country that's on the lower left of the diagram, and it's not so good to live in a country that's in the upper right. I don't know how clearly you can see it, but far in the upper right is the United States, which has high levels of income inequality and comes out poorly on all these measures of social problems. Down in the lower left are countries where there's a large redistribution of income. Norway, Sweden, Finland, the Nordic countries, and some others. Canada is about in the middle. But what this chart demonstrates, I think, is that the more inequality you have, the poorer the quality of life is in a given society. And I would argue that basic income can increase equality and lower those kinds of poor social outcomes. The third reason to think about implementing basic income in Canada has to do with enabling human freedom and individual choices. Sometimes basic income is called a left libertarian idea. It borrows from left political thinking because it's about looking after one another and collective responsibility and helping each other out. But it's libertarian or relates to freedom because it also looks at what individuals want to do with their lives and how they want to chart their course. And one thing that basic income can do is, first of all, in a negative sense, give us an exit option. If we have a bad job with a bad boss, or we live with an abusive spouse, or we live in an oppressive community, having an economic floor, a regular income upon which we can depend, it gives us the chance to leave those bad situations and start a new life for ourselves. On the more positive side, basic income can enable us to pursue an education, spend more time with our families, take a career sabbatical, those kinds of choices. The fourth reason that we need basic income in Canada relates to recognizing and supporting all the work that we do, both paid work and unpaid work. First of all, in our society today, we have a tremendous problem with precarious employment. Increasing numbers of people who work part-time, work on short-term contracts, don't have security of tenure in their jobs, and this is particularly affecting young people. So basic income provides those folks with, once again, a floor upon which to pursue opportunities in the labor market without a worry that they're going to, first of all, gives them chances to think about the long term, think about retirement, buying a home, but also gets them out of the day-to-day grind of just trying to make ends meet. There's also increasing attention to changes in the labor market with information technology and what I would call the relatively jobless future. I don't think paid late work is going to disappear, but on the other hand, we can think about automobile assembly line workers that their work is now done by robots. We can think about bank employees who are increasingly displaced by online banking and automatic teller machines. I was reading recently even highly skilled occupations like anesthesiology, you know, that doctors that work in operating rooms to keep people sedated, and they now have machines that can handle all that. So I think the reality is, looking into the years ahead, there's going to be fewer good jobs, so we have to think about how everybody's going to have enough money to live on. And lastly, what basic income does is recognize unpaid work, caring work in the home, and work that people do in the community, and expands our definition of work. Okay, the last and fifth reason on the list is that I think basic income will move us towards a more sustainable economy and society. I would argue that basic income is a necessary, it's not sufficient by itself. It's not going to do the job. We need to think about other things like carbon taxes and lowering consumption and clean technologies and so on. But basic income is one necessary ingredient in leaving a habitable planet, an environmentally sustainable planet for our children and grandchildren. It talks about redistribution. It's not premised on economic growth. Our welfare state programs, as they've developed, have really been premised on the growing economy, and everybody gets a slightly bigger piece of the pie. Those days are over. We have to think about steady state economics, and we have to think about redistribution of wealth in society. And I think basic income gets us partway towards that goal. And I think basic income can be one of these ingredients in an environmentally sustainable future that helps us focus more on human relationships and local community life, and really connects us with those around us. That it's not about more stuff, it's not about greater levels of consumption, it's about quality of life and working and living in a communal setting. There's different examples of basic income-like programs that exist in other parts of the world. One in the country of Brazil, there's a program called Bolsa Familia, resembles closely a basic income. It's been in place for years. It's reached millions of Brazilians, and it's had a tremendous impact on lowering the depth and breadth of poverty in that country. There's a partial basic income paid out in all places, of all places, the state of Alaska in the US. The state of Alaska uses part of its oil and gas revenues, puts it away in a separate fund, and pays out a dividend on a yearly basis to every single resident of Alaska. In Europe right now, there's great interest in basic income. Finland recently decided it's going to experiment with this model nationally and think about setting in place a program. There's local communities, cities in the Netherlands that are experimenting with local income at the local level. Similarly, in the country of India, there's actually a very sophisticated study using randomized controlled trials, villages where basic income is given compared to villages where basic income is not given to measure the effects and see how it might work. And the initial results are very, very encouraging. Right here in Canada, there's been, you've probably seen this in the media lately, there's been all kinds of interest in basic income just in the last 3 or 4 months, partly due to the change in the federal government. But at the provincial level, very recently, both the government of Ontario and the government of Quebec have talked about their interest in moving ahead with a guaranteed or basic income model to refashion their income security programs. The Green Party of Canada has been a proponent of basic income for many years. The Green Party of Manitoba is talking about implementing basic income here in Manitoba at the provincial level, and the Liberal Party of Manitoba is talking about experimenting with it and seeing how it might work. It's an interesting idea because it really attracts support from across the political spectrum. It attracts what you might call red Tories, like former Senator Hugh Segal, who's been a proponent for many years. It attracts, I think, thoughtful people in organized labor and on the Democratic left and the Social Democratic wing of our politics who are thinking about it too. Just one example, the new Minister of Social Development, Jean-Yves Duclos, has signaled his interest in this, so we'll see what happens at the federal level. There's a global and grassroots movement supporting basic income approaches. The Basic Income Earth Network is a global body that brings together people interested in basic income from around the world. They're having a conference in Korea at the end of June. The Basic Income Canada Network's been around for a while. It's a national body affiliated with BIEN that, we've been very busy lately at BICN because of all the interest. And very recently, a network has emerged here in Manitoba, Basic Income Manitoba. And just in May, a couple of months from now, less than 2 months from now, we're going to have a Congress on basic income. So if anybody is interested in what's happening in the basic income front, might like to come to this Congress, just go on the Faculty of Social Work website and you can find out more about it. So I hope you'll think about it. I hope you'll be interested in this idea. And I really want to thank you for your attention today. Merci. Miigwech.